morning to everyone. This is Marilyn from Bitpod for PKF Malta. I'm joined today by Vince, the man behind Computime.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you very much, Vince, for joining us. We have a very exciting session planned where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of transaction monitoring, which is something that pretty much anyone involved at any level within financial services has seen, met, read, and been lectured about endlessly.
Probably, and more and more, I would guess.
More and more, it's gaining traction with every passing day. So Vince, as a first question, would you give us a small introduction, rather not a question really, like an introduction into Computime and the journey of the last years leading up to where you are now with your current product offering?
Okay, so I will focus obviously Computime is quite a sort of a wide organization, but I will focus specifically on this particular area, let's say.
Yes.
So we've been working in the regulated, let's say, sector for probably around 7 to 8 years now. So basically providing solutions which help, mainly we started off with credit institutions in addressing, let's say, their regulatory obligations and reporting requirements when it comes to the regulators. And we've been doing that, as I said, for the last 7, 8 years. I would say in Malta, we're present probably in all the 27 or 28 banks.
Wow.
So I think in Malta, we're quite experienced in that field.
Mm-hmm.
But over the last 2, 3 years, let's say, probably closer to 3 years now, obviously we have seen this growing need for solutions in the AML space. And for us, it was, let's say, obviously maybe a natural, let's say, extension to sort of widen our portfolio from what we're currently doing in the regulated space and extend as well our portfolio with products around AML and the ML solutions. Mostly focused on the transaction monitoring part, not on the sort of initial KYC or onboarding, let's say, stages. Rather than when it sort of in terms of, let's say, customer base, rather than just remaining focused on sort of the financial sector, this as well helped us to sort of widen a bit our base into gaming.
Okay.
So I must say that specifically when it comes to AML transaction monitoring, we address requirements both in the financial space and also in the gaming space.
All right, so you find yourself in quite a niche position in terms of the offering, because onboarding and the first part is quite, we've become very well versed in it. I think the market is quite, even perhaps it is fair to say, saturated in a way. But transaction monitoring and the nitty-gritty technicalities that go into that puts you in quite a niche. And to be involved with the majority, if not all the banks, puts you into a very prestigious position as well, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's always a question as well. This is always a balance, and this is where I think maybe, at least I hope we add value, is that apart, let's say, from the technical aspects, there is as well all the, the business aspects that one needs to be sort of, conscious and sort of well versed into.
Yes.
So it's one thing just building an IT system and looking at things purely from a technical perspective, but it's another as well, sort of, that apart from that, you have as well all the necessary domain knowledge, let's say, to be able to understand the business users on the other side and their pains and requirements.
That's right. I want to pick on something you hinted at earlier, that in the last few years we've experienced, and still are, a surge in AML emphasis from all directions and fronts. On our end as a CSP, and auditor and tax advisor and accountants, we feel sort of a different end of it than you guys. And sometimes we are tempted to think that it is over-regulation, that the banks in particular are putting too much responsibility on us, and it all obviously is a trickle-down effect. And from your end, but that you work with the banks and you handhold them in a way and guide them to meet their own requirements. What's your gut feeling? Is it like a hype, or is there a valid justification to it? This surge in AML and anti-terrorist financing impressions that we're in right now?
Yeah, I think one has to maybe, look at two aspects in the sense that from, I think, from a pure requirement, let's say, perspective, I think looking at, how much, even if you look, let's say, at the financial sector alone, sort of the amount of financial products and different combinations and different ways how to access kind of these products and interact with these products, and looking even at the gaming sector, the different combinations, platforms, games, and it became so much sort of difficult to monitor for AML kind of requirements, and sort of I think probably, if I might sound a bit negative, maybe it became easier maybe for people to somehow, because let's face it, when we're looking at AML, in many cases, we're really trying to look for a needle in a haystack, right?
Yes.
So with all these combinations, with all these participants, etc., it became obviously very difficult to, let's say, remain, at least for the transaction monitoring part, definitely, to remain sort of, with traditional, let's say, maybe paper-based or semi-automated kind of methods. Just to give an idea, we have, yes, clients who maybe, I don't know, have few hundreds transactions a day, which maybe somehow you can, let's say, sort or filter using some basic tools, let's say. But I can give you the other extreme. We have clients who are monitoring with our solution something around 26 to 28 million transactions a day.
Wow.
So, when you're looking at those volumes, and obviously then the possibility of how many suspicious transactions you got, and obviously then you need to drill into those, it becomes
proportionately
extremely difficult if you don't have some sort of tools to manage or help you with that process, right?
That's right. It's difficult to comprehend in my little mind how so many transactions that they actually do happen in a day.
And a day, yeah, with the bigger, especially with the gaming companies, the volumes that we see on a daily basis, it's probably a few people might know sort of, the volumes of transactions that happen on a daily basis, right?
Which is why we aptly named today's session "Learning How to Slow Dance with Machines," because apparently it's you need to slow things down to understand how they work, and then be able to accelerate in an efficient manner. So to our listeners, Vince has kindly prepared a visual presentation and a sequence of slides that will help us delve deeper into their product. That will get into the detail of transaction monitoring from their point of view. So we invite you to join us in that next step.
Okay, so let's start. So basically today, sort of, the intention was to start maybe, a bit at a high level, speaking about the requirements, what we're trying to address, and the pain points that we're trying to address, and hopefully to try to sort of at least go to the next level and start speaking about, let's say, maybe at an architectural level, all the key components that need to be in place for such solutions, let's say, not just obviously I'll be speaking about Comply Radar, but sort of what are all the layers involved. Maybe then in another session we can drill down specifically into particular, let's say, layers, maybe more in depth on the machine learning side, etc., etc. So maybe it's the most exciting part, and sort of evolve sort of more into those particular layers.
Definitely. Let's do this. So Vince, we are in your hands.
Okay, thank you. So, we're speaking about transaction monitoring. First of all, I mean, I'm speaking about real time. So in fact, even the title is real-time transaction monitoring, which obviously is one of the first things that one needs to consider. So, traditional, let's say, reporting tools, let's say, or with traditional platforms, let's say, if you have, let's say, an internal data warehouse, etc., etc., the traditional approach would be, okay, I'm dumping all the transactions there, and then maybe every week or sort of, on a regular basis, I'm running reports on past data or past events, and I'm trying to see whether from, let's say, the traditional reporting, I detect something, let's say, suspicious or which needs further investigation.
Okay.
What we're saying here is this is a different approach, and this is real time. So we're able to detect these instances immediately. So in real time. And why we're pushing this approach? Well, very simple reason that typically when these things happen, it could be that if you're sort of you detect or find something a week later or a month later, it might be too late.
Definitely.
So if something fraudulent happened, the wrong transfer happened, or sort of some transactions happen, it might be, you know, this guy would have been already away, unreachable, and long gone. So one would need to take action as quickly as possible. So this is why we're focusing, and I think one of our key strengths is in the real-time transaction monitoring capabilities.
You're going to lead us into how it works. You have millions of little detectives watching the millions of little transactions.
Yeah, somehow like that maybe. So what Comply Radar enables you, so sort of just try to reduce as much as possible the human error, obviously. Which I said, monitoring of transactions live.
So you do it by removing the human?
As you will see, we still left that level kind of where the human gets involved. What we're trying to do is, as much as possible, filter and prioritize. So rather than probably a lot of the practitioners in the market will value that, for example, you have these watch lists, and we'll speak about watch lists. The problem with these watch lists is that when you fire a transaction or try to search in these watch lists, you get so many false positives. And that is a big problem. Why? Because it's always a double-edged sword. So you want to obviously, as much as possible, get notified about suspicious transactions. However, you want to facilitate and make life easy and as countable as possible for your customers.
Absolutely.
So bugging people with sending them additional questionnaires, etc., obviously, maybe in many cases, it doesn't help your business. So it's always a double-edged sword. Is this really a suspicious transaction? Do I really need to follow this trap and asking for further detailed proof of wealth, etc., or it's not required? So it's a very fine line, and you need that tool to help you really, as much as possible, avoid these kind of false positives and help the people and sort of manually that need be to investigate and further adapt what is, really possibly a suspicious transaction.
You have me hooked, because now you're entering the million-dollar question, what is suspicious and how you decide. In all previous sessions, we always touched upon this somehow. And it always comes to the difficulty in the subjective element, because the law doesn't define it, and no matter how many tools you have, ultimately it's the human that needs to decide at a point in time to act.
And in fact, as you'll see, Fractals kept through this, and so as you'll see, however, this is the whole idea. So the idea is to inject different layers. So first, for example, you have rules, then you have the machine learning layer, and every, let's say, layer is as much as possible helping from different aspects. It's like you have different experts, right? So the rules, in a way, it's like having an expert where, like, for example, I took certain rules from a human. Okay, like if a transaction is or above a certain threshold, and the transaction is coming from Cuba, then that is possibly suspicious.
Okay.
So this is intelligence or experience that is somehow translated into rules.
Wow.
Right? And those are fixed, so there's a problem. I mean, they're obviously very helpful in many cases, and you still need them. But then, as we move along, we see that then there is the machine learning layer, which adds this additional layer of intelligence over those. So it acts as a further filter. And then hopefully when we're filtering all these layers, we have these layers of filters, then it's like, imagine it's like having different nets. No? So we have a first net, which is filtering where it's granular up to a certain level. Then you have a more granular net on top of it, and then you keep adding nets. And hopefully at the top you have, only those which are really kind of suspicious.
All right.
So this is how it works, and we'll see the layers as we move along.
Let's go.
So at the end of the day, the objectives, we want to address the transaction monitoring requirements as specified by ML regulations. Again, I just wish to distinguish here is this idea that AML as a process, you have typically the onboarding part, and you have the transaction ongoing monitoring.
Yes.
What we do from our end is we just focus on the ongoing monitoring part. So we don't handle the initial onboarding process, and you have a number of solutions which handle that part.
Agreed.
We typically communicate with these systems because obviously we need information from this system, but we don't handle the initial part.
Okay.
So we automate the transaction monitoring process, minimizing the workload, ensure that the configured monitoring rules can be changed because we might need to change them.
So this is if it's coming from Cuba in a certain amount or above.
Exactly, you might need to change them and you need to see the effect as we'll see. And obviously the intention, as I said, is to try to help keep this right balance between the stringent regulation on one side and customer experience.
Yes.
It's always this kind of, this dilemma kind of. So where does Comply Radar fit as a solution? So at a high level, one could look at sort of, three main areas. So you have Comply Radar on one side, and then typically we're communicating with the KYC application where you have the referential data. So if I get someone new and I'm onboarding him, so obviously I will ask him a lot of questions for documentation, enough passports, IDs, proof of wealth, etc., etc. And then you have the operational systems where the operation is really happening. So if this is a bank, you have the KYC solution where all the details are stored, but then you have the core banking system where the operation is managed. If it's a gaming company, you have still the KYC application, but you have the gaming platform kind of, which is the operation system. And you have Comply Radar, which is actually communicating with these two systems. So
you are anticipating that in order to even work as a starting point, the KYC aspect of your client needs to be to some level automated too. It needs to be a solution.
Yes, typically, at least from our experience, normally when a client goes into sort of this process of automating this KYC process, normally the first step would be to set up the KYC solution, and then as an additional kind of layer, you plug in the transaction monitoring. It's like, because let's face it, if I need to monitor a transaction, for example, I will need to know, okay, this transaction belongs to who and it's going where. And the information is typically, I get it from the KYC application.
Right.
So is this guy a PEP? What's his sort of, what's his job? What's his country of origin? And obviously certain rules depend or are dependent on the combinations of, depending on his profile kind of thing. So if this guy is a PEP and the transaction is flowing to a certain country, then if he's a PEP, there are certain conditions which are different from people that are not PEPs, for example.
Right.
So we need to continuously interact with the KYC platform to get this information. On the other hand, the transactions happen in the operational systems. So obviously we need to sort of sit or piggyback on the operational systems in order to be able to sift all the transactions that are happening on the operational system, being it a core banking system, if it's a bank, or a gaming platform, if it's a gaming company. So this is where we fit solution-wise. So how are we adding value? So obviously on one side, we know that in many cases, the ML processes are, let's say, semi-manual. So there might be systems, but then kind of it's still kind of this filtering process. Typically, in many cases, you still find Excel, which is, let's say, the most glorified tool.
All right, yes,
and sort of they use Excel to sort of filter down transactions, etc. But that process is still laborious. As I said, and probably who comes from the industry knows, there's still the situation of very high false positives numbers, and that still creates a big problem.
And to break it down, false positives, we're talking about, for our listeners' benefit, when the thresholds that you would have put in place to flag something as possibly suspicious catches within it more than is intended. Is that
exactly? Typically, I would have, for example, I don't know, let's say I get 1,000 false positives a day, then I would need to investigate, and then I find out that from those 1,000 suspicious, only 2 of them were really kind of, or there is the possibility of AML activity kind of thing. So the number of false positives increases, let's say, or makes the process, let's say, very inefficient.
Yes.
Right? So it's quite a big problem today. So on the other hand, an AML intelligent, what we're calling this intelligent automation, and we're mainly mentioning intelligent as well because we inject some machine learning stuff in one of the layers as we'll speak, is we try to reduce these false positives as much as possible. Something else that we're adding, and I'm mentioning, is adaptive and back testing. So in practice, what happens is this. So let's say you have the AML guy and say sort of, or the main guy responsible for ML and say, okay, yes, we need to start taking more action and maybe a bit more stringent. So let's make our rules, let's say, more stringent. The problem with that is that, let's say, a very simple rule that if I have someone who, for example, over the last 2 hours deposited more than 10,000 euros, then I need to be alerted. And instead of 10,000, I bring that down to 8,000, let's say, which obviously means that I'm going to catch more kind of suspicious transactions. But the problem is that you need an environment where I would have sort of enough comfort that I know that if I'm going to lower that threshold, okay, how many false positives that might generate. So I need some sort of backtesting kind of platform that gives me the ability that when I change something, I know the effect of it by looking at past data automatically. Because it could have quite a disastrous effect if you just change rules and you don't have a situation where you can, okay, because imagine I drop it down to 5,000 and suddenly it starts generating thousands and thousands of suspicious transactions. So it is very important to be able to have this backtesting kind of feature as well.
So what it does, this backtesting, is gives you like a benchmark for interpreting the variation in results.
Exactly, because I could look back and I would say, okay, if I have these rules and sort of I change this, okay, if I had to look at the past 2 years, what happens? Okay, it would have captured these list of suspicious transactions, out of which X% were really kind of, really suspicious kind of. Okay, then I have a situation where if I have to change this and look back at in the last 2 years, would the system improve? Would it just hone on these? Would it capture more false positives? So you can really tweak your solution by looking back and see the effect, right? So, anyways, let's move to the next. You have as well situations because you have banks, for example, have the process itself can be centralized or even decentralized. So we could have, for example, a bank where there is just one central office which is responsible for managing the ML process, and these are the guys who are centrally overlooking the transactions and the process, etc. But you could have a situation where you have the branches themselves, sort of in a decentralized fashion, are already executing ML processes in the branches. And then so the responsibility of the ML process itself is not just centralized, but it's sort of pushed across all the organization, which I think is probably the ideal way. It's not, because sometimes the closer to the actual branches or to the actual interaction with the client, you can act quicker, because if you have a centralized kind of all the process is centralized, obviously by the time that sort of the information reaches
back,
you've lost time.
Right.
So you have as well, and Comply Radar can adapt in situations where you have a completely centralized process or even a decentralized process. And the key components of the solution, so we have the intelligent rules, and we'll sort of drill into and give examples of these. So intelligent rule engines, so have the machine learning and statistics from the transactions being generated, and as well the ability to integrate with Watchlists, KYC platforms, and even information scraping from the internet. So it's not just a question of just looking at the transaction, but having a system that is able to look at your Facebook, your LinkedIn, and extracting things like your lifestyle from your job role, which one you're employed. All this information is typically
data points.
Exactly. But this is information, who works in the ML space, this is sort of, normally when they're investigating, you will need to look for this information. And it's amazing, sometimes people do not kind of appreciate how much information there is about you on the internet.
For sure.
So even doing like specific searches, you can find, activities like whether this person had any issues with the law, whether he had any court cases, etc. You will find everything about this person. So what we'll do and what we'll discuss is that the platform itself as well, as much as possible, brings this information into the system so that this information is well presented in one system rather than having one system which is just looking at transactions. Another system, then you open the browser and go search for that person. So we bring all that information in one interface as much as possible. So these are the layers, and what I was calling as those nets, one net over the other. So basically at the lowest level, let's say obviously we have that integration layer, which gives us this facility to integrate with external system, both to inject kind of referential data, transactions, this information that we're scraping from the internet, etc. So we need obviously something to integrate with external systems. The first net is these watch lists and the screen scraping. So there are, let's say, a lot of watch lists available. So these are organizations which would have, let's say, official lists of persons that either were involved in illegal activities, terrorist activities, etc., etc. So
these like FATF in our mind, the Financial Action Task Force.
So these are, let's say, this is the first level. So immediately our system integrates with these lists. So immediately if you find a person that is sort of, earmarked on one of these lists, you obviously need to notify the user immediately about that. And we have the screen scraping, which is information, as I said, from the LinkedIn's, Facebooks, etc., Google searches, etc. The second level, and we'll see examples of these, are the fixed rules. So these are typically if-then kind of rules. So
logic.
Exactly.
Back to my philosophy days. If
exactly, they are pretty much like logic kind of based rules. Now, if, for example, you have a person from this particular sanctioned country, then I wish to know. If you have a person who is employed in this kind of role and he affected a transaction which is bigger than this threshold in the last week, then I need to know. If this client, because over there in the slide you're seeing threshold, frequency, velocity, and segment. So I can look at frequency, for example. So it's like if this client performed more than 20 transactions in the last week, or it can be even sort of velocity based. So if he deposited 10,000 and he withdrawn close to 10,000 amount in less than 15 minutes. So I would need to know.
To even peg these down, wouldn't you need a basic benchmark to know what is typical? Would you have that first?
I mean, we would obviously from our implementations, we've learned a lot. So because, I mean, when you implement, firstly, I mean, in fact, our product comes with a set of rules out of the box, let's say. Which is mostly, experience that we've gathered over a number of implementations. But that doesn't mean, obviously, that is what comes out of the box. Then normally, as part of the implementation, each client would tweak, let's say, the rules to his requirements. Then you have the machine learning models. What are the machine learning models? Machine learning models, sometimes people don't speak about the AI, it's really happening.
Buzzword of the
Exactly. So I try to kind of, try to explain maybe a bit simply. So let's say, for example, if I had to sort of, if you had 100 balls and on the table here, just, drop 100 balls and I have 20 of them which are red, let's say, and I have 90 which are blue, right? And then I tell you like, okay, can you sort of pick a ruler and try to draw a straight line which as best possible divides the blue balls from the red balls, right? So basically, all the balls on one side of the line are all red and all balls on the other side are all blue, right? That is typically what happens with a very, very, very simple kind of, machine learning kind of algorithm. So we're trying to create separators kind of between data, so we try to separate. Now a rule itself, so linking back to your logic, if I tell you like, if a transaction is greater than 10,000 or 50,000, then I need to be notified. So mathematically that can be converted, that is really a line separator, because on one side of the line they are sort of, suspicious, on the other line they are not suspicious. Now imagine if I had to tell you, okay, now instead of one line, can you maybe add two lines which maybe help to separate even more? So instead of when I had two lines, I could have, okay, then the balls in this segment or sector that I formed, then those are the suspicious, the balls that fall in this region. And so this is adding rules. Adding rules is really, if you have to look at the space that of this table, kind of trying to separate kind of the blue from the red balls. Each rule is actually adding a line. Adding a line. So I'm dissecting kind of the space of the data points that I have. But lines, obviously, even the way I'm explaining, it's not that easy sometimes to separate, because like you might have put a line and maybe, you manage to separate 15 of the red balls from the blue ones, but you might have 5 which still fall on the other side of the line.
Correct.
So they are incorrectly classified, right? And this is sort of the distinction between normal rules and the machine learning rules. So rules will only help you to create these straight lines to divide data. And in many cases, you still need them, because like there are certain things which are obvious. Let's say, for example, if a person is transacting and this guy is from a sanctioned country, I wish to know and stop this guy immediately. That is obvious, and it's very difficult to separate. If you look the same analogy, it's very difficult to, with a straight line, to separate the suspicious from not, because it's like, if I had to tell you drop these balls with this table, it is very clear that all the red balls are in a particular corner, all the blue balls are in another corner of the table. So it's very easy to separate one from the other. But then when things start to get complex, a line will not be enough. It's like, you have a lot of overlaps. So a lot of the red balls still lie on the other side. And that is where machine learning starts to get more intelligent, in the sense that it becomes more adequate. Because machine learning, let's say, takes it to the next layer. So rather than, for example, being able to just draw lines like we do with rules, right? You can put curved lines, for example. Or sort of, so the border between the two areas can be sort of, as curvy, let's say, to use a very small, simple term, as possible, to make sure that I separate as cleanly as possible the two sides. And this is where machine learning, when this gets complex, and obviously we're not looking at just a threshold now, so when you look at all the features, it starts to get extremely difficult to create the separating. And this is where machine learning helps.
So machine learning is the flexi ruler we had in mathematics very many years ago in class, the one that we used for graphs.
Exactly. It's in many cases when we discuss machine learning, and you hear that this term used, that we're classifying, right? So whether something is suspicious or not, right? It's pretty much the approach is pretty much, how able we are to separate kind of these data sets and finding kind of these separators which help us identify what is suspicious from not. And it's pretty much, the simplest model, like a rule, is pretty much just a line. Which obviously in complex situations, a line is not enough in many cases. And this is why then you get a lot of false positives, because you'll get a lot of the red balls lying on the other side, or the blue balls on the other side in any case, and so you get a mix. So you get, with the true positives, you get as well a lot of false positives, because they are sort of, the line is not really separating sort of, 100% one side to the other. That's the accuracy problem that there is. So anyways, hope I try to explain that in a way.
It is the most beautiful way anyone ever explained it.
And then we have these intelligent rules, which basically run on top of the machine learning models and the fixed rules. So I could have done a rule which says, if this guy is from this country and my machine learning algorithm told it that this is, with high level of probability is a suspicious transaction, then I want to take this action, right?
Such as?
It could be, typically we have two situations. We have situations where, for example, if there are certain rules, for example, sanctioned country, let's keep it simple. We have banks, for example, where they deploy these rules, and we call them blocking rules, in the sense that the transaction doesn't even hit the core platform. So when a transaction flows, and this transaction is coming from this particular sanctioned country, it doesn't even touch the core banking system.
So it's not effective.
Exactly. So it's a blocking kind of rule. There are other rules which we call them non-blocking. So the transaction would have gone in, but a separate process is being sort of, carried out by our solution, which is checking kind of, for further sort of, validity or proof that this might be suspicious. But in the meantime, I don't stop the process.
Which reflects on how careful the whole system has to be on what we were saying earlier, the delicate balance between the client, the business, and
Exactly. So this is why there are things which are obvious and I want to stop them immediately. But then there are other things where sort of I keep the operation going and in the background I'm doing these checks, right?
Yes.
And then as a last layer, in fact, over there, as you'll see, you have this AML user approval. So what the way at least when sort of our solution works is that after we apply all these rules, and hopefully the intention is to reduce these false positives kind of substantially, right? We still, in many cases, it's a rule. It's the way it depends how you set the solution. For certain rules, we request as well, in many cases, an AML kind of user approval or review. So a user gets notified about these kind of suspicious transactions, and then it's him as in the last step of the workflow, let's say, which says, okay, then I confirm that this is really something suspicious, or no, maybe I don't know. This guy sort of, we have further information about this guy, blah, 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 and for some reason, I'm allowing this transaction to happen. So sort of, there's still, we can at least allow the user to be part of this workflow, let's say. And I think it's very difficult to remove completely
the client's role.
Exactly, the user's role completely from this process. So, I don't know how we're in time by this.
We're all right, I think. Where have we reached halfway rather?
Okay, of course, I don't know sort of whether sort of I need to speed up or.
No, we're good.
Okay.
We're halfway through.
So, so now I'll just go into a bit more detail on those layers. So I'll just go to the next knowledge kind of detail. So I mentioned this integration layer, which is very important. So Comply Radar provides this ongoing monitoring, as I said, in real time. But it's as well, even technology-wise, so even for the more technical guys out there, it's very important to keep in mind the real-time, meaning the ability to ingest possibly thousands of transactions a second. So having systems like 26, 27 million transactions a day means that you need to be able to easily handle, I don't know, 800 to 1,000 transactions a second, right? Which is obviously quite a high number. And it's not just injecting them, but obviously on each transaction you need to apply all the rules and checks that we're mentioning. It needs to as well be able to connect to external systems like the KYC banking systems, and obviously jointly enable total solution for compliance. So the joint overall solution would be obviously not just our product, but our product integrated with the KYC and banking systems. It as well needs to provide the facility to push information out, where it's not just injecting data. So be able to send emails, update risk notifications, update risk scores. So if something happens, for example, we detect certain event, then we would need to, for example, increase the particular client risk score, right? So that even on the KYC platform, that is kind of present in that platform.
It's something you do yourselves as well.
Yes, we update this risk score.
Okay.
Then with the watch list. The watch list, for example, there are a lot available. Mentioned the ability at that first layer to connect to multiple international watch list providers. For example, WorldCheck, which is quite a common provider, yes, but there are a number of others similar to WorldCheck. Watch lists can as well reside internally. So internally you might have your own internal watch lists, and then we can connect to those watch lists as well. And typically these watch lists, as I mentioned before, act as, let's say, the first transaction filter, let's say the first net, right? The problem with this is that typically you still have a number of very high false positives. So it doesn't eliminate a lot of false. You still have that problem. So we still need it there because you need it there, but obviously you still need to add a lot of layers above it. We mentioned as well the automatically scraping kind of relevant client information from the internet. So typically all the published core documents, LinkedIn, Facebook information. So that is brought typically as well and injected into the system. And the user can as well, let's say, filter that information. So for example, if there is Venezuela, I can go on the internet the user automatically on the screen will see all the information coming about Vella, but I'm quite sure there are, I don't know, some 5 or 10 other Vellas. So the user has the facility as well to see all the information, and he can as well then, let's say, automatically remove information which he thinks belongs maybe to some other Vella, not my information. And once he cleans that information, then automatically only the cleaned information will remain in the system.
And this is a manual process.
There is this, we try to as much as possible filter this information and sort of try to sort of take out all the sort of irrelevant information, but we still, it is still very difficult to do it automatically without allowing the user, let's say, to sort of go through a final check and sort of eliminate some information which doesn't really belong to the Vella who I have in front of me, let's say.
Fair enough.
Then there are the fixed rules, and the fixed rules examples, so they take the form of very user-friendly kind of rules. So if some condition happens, then take some actions. So we have threshold rules, for example, if there's a deposit greater than 10K, for example. Reference data rule, if there's a transaction where the country of origin, for example, is the UK or whatever. You have grouping and aggregations with the rules. So, for example, if total deposits is greater than 10,000 in the last 2 days, right?
This you would need to tailor according to each client specifically and what is relevant to them, or it's a sort of market standard?
Normally, as I said, I mean, we have a number of rules which come out of the box, which I would say now with time became quite standard.
Like 10,000 plus.
Exactly. But it's always at the discretion of the client to sort of, and maybe in the next session we can actually show how easy it is to customize these rules.
Yes.
Because we have to be careful that kind of even a business user can very easily change. We don't need an IT person to put in these rules, kind of. Then you have frequency rules. So, for example, if the total number of withdrawals is greater than 5 in the last hour, so there is a frequency thing involved here. It could be velocity rule. So if a withdrawal of a similar amount was deposited, is that in less than 15 minutes. So you have money coming in and out of the same approximate value in less than 15 minutes. So maybe something suspicious happened there. And even the rules can as well, which adds a bit more complexity. They could be applied either at customer level, at account level, at relationship level, and at segment. So for example, when I say threshold, for example, let's say deposit threshold, simple deposit threshold, but are you applying that at the customer level? So grouping all these accounts, are you applying that rule on one specific account belonging to that customer? Are you taking into consideration relationships? So is that the threshold linked between him and his wife, between him and his business partners, let's say? So suddenly there are so many dimensions that one can look at. It starts to get quite complex. And there's segment as well, because certain rules or certain thresholds, just to keep things simple, might apply for certain products, but not for others. Could be by area, could be they apply for people coming from the UK, but they are different for people who are coming from Germany, right? Could be by age. I apply a certain rule only if the client is in the age group between 20 and 30, but not if he's above 50, for example. So there are different combinations, and obviously the number of rules can be quite a long list, kind of, to manage as well. So we mentioned blocking and non-blocking transactions. So for example, these are more examples. So for example, if it's transaction from a sanctioned country, I want to block it. Or if it's a non-euro transaction from Cuba, I want to block it. Or you might have, things like if it's a large transaction, if it's a medium transaction, frequent internal transfers, velocity instant withdrawals. These are all instances. Just to, so I don't need to go through all of them, but just to show examples of the typical rules that you can create with Comply Radar. And as well, I mean, I think you referred to to this thing earlier. The regulation doesn't really, so in some cases is a bit sort of, bit gray.
Neither
Like
here
for example,
nor there.
so for example, it tells you it is out of profile. For example, you mentioned this out of profile thing. If a transaction is out of profile, but what is really out of profile? How do you define out of profile? Right? So what we do is that, for example, in our case, so for each individual, we have a distribution, let's say, of his typical events. So how much, in terms of a distribution, his particular distribution, how much this guy typically deposits, how frequently, etc., based on his profile, from where he's coming, etc. So we create, let's say, a profile by looking at things maybe a bit more statistically. So looking at transactions and looking at distributions pertaining to a particular client. So then when we have some event, which is, let's say, quite far from the middle kind of the distribution of this particular guy, then obviously for us, it's something which is out of profile.
Yes.
So we take more of a statistical approach to define this kind of out of profile.
And these profiles are generated for each user of your clients sort of automatically, or?
Exactly. I mean, we can sort of what I'm calling these distributions, these are profiles that we can typically create both at an individual level, but even at a segment level. So for example, you might have a particular distribution which or is made up of all the events from users who are from the UK of a particular age group, for example, right? Or on those players who play this particular game, right? So you create a profile made up of a group of activities from a number of users, and you can use that as an out of profile, right? So that is now the machine learning. We explained, I think, a bit machine learning, how it works, kind of at least conceptually. The problem itself is, as well with rules, typically happens because obviously who is really trying to sort of, deceive the system kind of thing and obviously remain undetected knows AML regulations quite well normally. Sure. Okay, otherwise he's not good at it anyways. Yeah. So in many cases they know that a lot of companies are threshold-based or apply threshold-based rules. And they know what the thresholds are. So obviously the least thing that these guys would do is obviously know these thresholds and as much as possible fly below them.
Yeah.
So we have that 10K rule. It's obviously very easy to just hide yourself just below that the radar, and obviously no one will detect you, especially in view that sort of, as I said, a lot of organizations handle thousands and thousands of transactions a day. It's very difficult to pinpoint these activities.
Definitely. Almost impossible in my mind, but it must be actually you make
with machine learning, at least we're saying you're applying more of a probabilistic approach. Right. So it's not just keeping under the radar, but at least I have a probabilistic approach, and even if I'm on the radar, I could still have a high probability that this transaction might be really a suspicious transaction.
And then you've given the next dance move to the criminal on the other side.
Exactly, approach. You have to, and I think, although I don't think that I'm not suggesting that rules should be removed. I think rules still have their place, and for certain sort of for certain things, rules are very easy to apply and they are very effective. But I think nowadays, apart from that layer, one needs to as well starting off adding more sophisticated layers.
Rules, just to clarify, we're talking about not legal rules, but rules that are embedded into the solution that is doing
these if-then kind of logical rules.
Yes, that's right.
So those are good at a certain level, but one would need, or there are, let's say, more sophisticated tools today to help with defining what's suspicious or not, let's say.
Since we have 10 minutes left, maybe we start slowly wrapping up.
Okay, so maybe with sort of this machine learning, I think just a few more slides, and I think we're in time. So this is again the other next layer that we spoke about, the machine learning, and obviously as well when we speak about machine learning, maybe next time we'll have more sort of time to delve a bit more detail how machine learning is applied. It is learning as well, not just obviously the transaction data, but all the information of that I'm capturing from the underlying layers. So when we said external data coming from LinkedIn, Facebook, etc., data coming from KYC, obviously the transaction data itself, and even statistics on the data. So the frequency of sort of, how many, for example, deposits are happening, the typical amounts, etc. So all the information from the underlying layers is then being fed into this machine learning kind of layer. So hopefully machine learning can sort of use all the benefit of all the underlying layers itself to even sort of take it to the next level of kind of sophistication.
Impressive.
So then you have these intelligent rules. So the intelligent rules are able to act on information or events from all the underlying layers, namely the fixed rules and the machine learning layers. So it really combines everything together. So rules, for example, looking at those 2 points at the bottom, they become like if a threshold rule was fired, for example, there was this 10K rule, simple 10K rule. And the machine learning layer indicated that there is a high probability of a suspicious transaction, then increase the risk score. So then I'm combining different layers together with these logical if-then rules.
It's not a robot doing all this, because in my mind, this machine learning is a smart robot running around an office, hitting buttons and raising thresholds. But it's actually embedded into a.
Not yet.
It's actually embedded into a computer program.
Yes. And then we said, I mean, like at the end, we still always suggest that there is an AML kind of a human involved. So rules can be used to either sort of, we can have a situation where we can act immediately because there are certain rules where, you say, if this happens, I don't really need to involve a human. I need to take action immediately and I can automate that. But then obviously there are still situations where decisions are very judgmental and you need maybe an expert to get involved because there is a sort of, some sort of judgment which maybe, let's say, for the time being, a human is better than a machine, let's say. So we'll leave certain instances in the workflow, let's say, that these kind of suspicious transactions, we then pass them to the expert for further validation. Obviously, still providing all the information. So, for example, if the machine learning layer is saying that this is suspicious, we provide all the information of why our machine learning algorithm sort of reached this decision to the expert. So hopefully, at least the expert has more information to base his decision as well. So definitely, sort of has all the information coming from all the layers. He gets all the sort of all the data in front of him, and then he can take the decision.
Final judgment.
Exactly. Let's because I mean there are certain situations obviously before taking certain decisions might obviously have quite some heavy executive repercussions. So this is why typically on certain instances we involve obviously the audit trail is very important even from a regulatory perspective. So any action that is taken is fully audited in the system. So that is key as well. And the live dashboards, and I think we can close here for today. So we have a situation, so obviously need to know. So it's like, imagine this live dashboard where I'm seeing every day, literally, I mean live, not every day, sort of, charts which are showing all the transactions, like a plot which is showing me all the volume of transactions coming in, the number of deposits, withdrawals coming in, automatically showing me how many suspicious transactions in real time I'm detecting. Because typically this helps. Why? Because it helps to detect as well patterns.
Yes.
For example, there is an attack, and suddenly I'm looking at the charts, and suddenly over the last hour I see the number of suspicious transactions going up much more than average, right? So that would help me to immediately detect that there's something suspicious happening right now.
Yes.
Right. So we believe that these live dashboards and reports really help to sort of, really in real time be able to sort of monitor everything that's happening
and just to
on
put some context, to monitor one bank, for example, how many humans would it require?
Humans in the sense, I mean, every bank would have his own ML team, right? And
but these live dashboards, say, to monitor them, would it just need one human, or you'd need a whole set?
No, I mean, typically we provide these to all the team. So
right.
it's up to them, really,
to
right?
distribute.
To distribute. What I'm saying is that at the moment, you don't find a lot of clients who sort of are monitoring this live. What I'm saying with Comply Radar, what we added is this kind of visibility on one screen. Typically, maybe, we're more used to these kind of help desk kind of screens where you move into a company and see how many calls you're having and how many kind of these call center type of screens, right? So we're saying the same kind of idea, but obviously to monitor activity, live activity, what's happening on your system right now.
Okay. Vince, it is an incredibly engaging subject. I am on the edge of my seat. I can't wait till we have the next session, because it is an incredibly, it is a buzzword, this machine learning and AI is all we hear about and have heard about for the last, I think, more than 12 months. But to have it actually broken down in this manner and put into context is putting the color to the picture, which is, I'm sure, what we all want. So thank you so much for joining us. Very, very much. Do you have a closing remarks, maybe leading us into what we'll do next time?
Okay, I mean, next time, obviously, today we touched a bit on the sort of very high level on the key components and maybe sort of very high level architecture of the main components of the whole solution. The intention of next time maybe is to drill a bit deeper, even show some screens and sort of maybe be able to sort of, be able to even demonstrate the application itself and how it works really, right? So
fantastic. Looking forward very much.
Good.
Thank you so much, Vince.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody who joined us today. And stay tuned and watch our socials where we'll announce when the follow-up session will be held. And that's it from us from now, and have a good rest of Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.